where those who perceive truth may strive to make others see.
A big, powerful America, and shoot them for what?
On that continent, we are trying to forge a new identity for which we need each other.
I want you to imagine that you're a teacher, and when you go into your class, you tell the class the curriculum is about to change, and this change is going to include less literary information. Now, you also explain that there's going to be a shift towards more agricultural information that helps students grow cash crops for Europeans and fulfill their natural roles as farmers. Now, today we're talking about colonialism and the Renaissance, and we're going to be referencing quite a few things in terms of my background individually, as kind of just I would say a black man who has been on a journey to become an intellectual in America, and also more importantly, we're going to be referencing how Europe underdeveloped Africa, and this is going to be by Walter Rodney. Now, this is obviously this was an interesting book for me in particular. Me in particular, as my particular role in this particular incarnation in general. But I'm really keen on this idea of what happened and really what's going on, because the prevailing idea is that or I wouldn't call it the prevailing idea, but one of the primary ideas is that white people left black people to their own means, and this is kind of the result in terms of what's happening in Africa being the result. And this is of course the idea itself is rooted in the myth of white supremacy. I think is pretty strong in terms of this particular ideology, but really looking and understanding from a more precise point of view is going to be really important, because it almost gives a lot of people, helps a lot of people who believe in this myth. It helps them sleep at night. And the truth is so much more complex than simply than this idea, right, of white people leaving black people, and essentially this post-apocalyptic scenario in Africa, in certain regions in Africa, is the result of that. My particular role, or my particular background, I'm an African American, and I have a lot of or not a lot, but I don't really know. I haven't done any ancestry to figure out where I come from in a lot of different ways, but I do know that, or I do ascertain, or I do think that my roots are rooted in kind of descendants of slaves, to have really a background that is really not prideful in any way towards any particular region, right? So, in any particular region or place in Africa. My parents are from Brooklyn, and I think my grandparents are from like North Carolina or the Carolinas in general, and I have family all around. In America, there's a kind of a divide right now between, or there's really a divide for those who really take time to notice, between American blacks and the blacks that really come directly from Africa. And the divide is rooted into this idea of, Africans don't necessarily think of themselves and try really hard to separate themselves sometimes from black Americans. And that's really rooted in a lot, but I would say mostly it's rooted in how we have been portrayed, and that is, I think, central to a lot of what's going on right now, of us not really having the control over our own image, right? And this is kind of, this feels a bit like a tangent, but when it comes down to understanding the idea and the separation that occurred now, it's important that we really understand something. The American, or the African American today, is the European hybrid of Africans as they were before colonialism and before slavery. This idea of a lot of what is done in poor communities, in African American communities, is a result of us valuing a culture of that's more closely related to really what happened in medieval Europe than what happened in Africa itself. And this is kind of what we're seeing today. But in terms of the way Africans see themselves, they do not identify with us for a lot of reasons, and that's something that appears very much apparent when you interact with a lot of people. Period. I think there's a lot to be really done in our communities, and I won't go off on a tangent. I'll try not to go off on a tangent here, but it's just really the result of this being taken out of being taken out of a certain place and being exposed and constantly exposed to this idea and myth that we're inferior, and it's been a profitable ideology. So there's a definite reasons why we've been exposed to this myth, and there's a lot of undercurrents to this particular ideology in general. But in general, the idea of Europe's underdeveloping Africa, capitalism, as we understand it right now, is really it has to create a loser, and in Africa they've done that for sure, but also in other places. I think Africa's really just kind of really been at the brunt of a lot of this idea. Now, in terms of like this particular book, The Insight, now the Mr. Rodney, he has a lot to say about colonialism in general, and how it affects many African Americans in the world today. And I see how it affects really a lot of African Americans in the world today. But one really the definition of a developed society, in terms of how we use definitions today, is really dependent on there being an undeveloped society that sacrifices for, our gains. This idea and this concept of is really something that's made apparent when during I'll say during a lot of what takes place in the story, Africans are, their kingdoms in Africa that, essentially try to convince Europe to find a way to profit off of their own lands and their own people. And they, it's a refusal. It's a flat-out refusal, and it's comfortable, to colonize, and those comforts are. It's so unnatural, right? Because the idea of really today, people need to understand something. I'm not for or against capitalism or socialism. I don't think the system that takes us into a society that survives past this current lifespan, when we think about a society that lasts for thousands of years, I don't think we'll be thinking in terms of colonialism versus capitalism. I think we'll have to really, really think about and figure out how to move on and move forward. But when it comes down to this particular idea currently, we need to understand that we only have the earth, right? In terms of our profit, the way we systemize things, we only have our earth, right? So we need to understand something. The capital that we generate is based on how we process this earth, right? It's really simple in terms of the way that sounds, but complex, and when you start to kind of muddy the waters with kind of this idea of how we've been thinking about things. This idea of really like trying to create the society that lasts, this is going to be generated through an idea of really furthering our ability to process what we have, in essentially somehow creating, somehow moving from this concept of being parasites to Earth into being more so symbiotes to Earth. Now, in terms of defining developed society, that's more of a tangent. But in terms of defining developed society, a lot of nations are one thing that really came across in this book. This definition of a developed society, it's linked to the concentration of doctors, scientists, and engineers, right? So, in terms of a society today, in terms of a developed society, this is something that I believe is going to be key in terms of understanding really where we're going, right? So, as African Americans, but also as just Africans and people in general, right? So, like when we develop a society, and when we try to create this ideal society, this concentration of doctors, scientists, and engineers needs to be included in whatever goalpost that we create. Now, I think there's a lot to be said about the quality control of such, and we'll talk, and that'll be, I think that is definitely up for discussion amongst, whatever associations that come out to, define this idea of a doctor, a scientist, or an engineer in a particular location or in a particular society, in this society. But also, what's really something that comes across is this idea of also mentioning the concentration of doctors, scientists, and engineers, but also the concentration of politicians, right? And this is something that is we don't necessarily think about a lot, but in terms of this in terms of this increased concentration of politicians, politics and politicians in an area, that kind of says of it kind of speaks of a society that has kind of grown past the element of, or realized that they can't get what they want through violence or violent means if necessary, right? So this concentration of politicians is more so, hey, it speaks of an interaction between, societies that don't necessarily share don't necessarily share different elements, but they do have an understanding of the whole, right? The whole of really this idea of my society and your society. And that does definitely speak of a a culture or society that has moved past balance to get what they want. And I think I think we need to understand that, right? Like, so representation isn't necessarily representation doesn't necessarily have to be corrupt or evil by nature. I think right now, we're seeing a lot of that, but it's through really the selective process that creates what we have today. I think we'll have to really look at. Now, I think we can really get past this idea of politicians and our stigma towards politicians when we kind of correct the system that selects for politicians more so. But this idea of really creating this ideal society, it almost hurts to say. I'll be honest with you. It almost hurts to say that the concentration of politicians is going to be a factor that we have to worry about, right? And a factor that we should really think about. I think of myself as a recovering conspiracy theorist. I'll say, but this is, I mean, in terms of right now defining and moving forward, I think we have to all get on our recovery and realize, and really come to a pinpoint understanding of what's gone wrong with society today to move forward and past that, right? One idea that Rodney brings up in this book was that socialism doesn't seem to lead to colonialism, and I think that's something that we'll have to think about, because what he says is a lot of socialist governments and nations don't necessarily invest in this concept of colonialism, and don't rely on this concept nearly as much as capitalists do. And I think that's something that we should certainly think about when it came down to I forget what it's called, the way the Europeans decided to divide and cut up Africa. And this wasn't something that Russia or China was necessarily dependent on, right, or saw inherent value to, but for some reason, or in terms of what came about, our current version of capitalism does seem to really give more understanding to this idea of what made colonialism so appealing in America. This is a tremendous strike against capitalism, and I think we'd be fools to not understand and really recognize this in terms of for creating the system moving forward. And this I think this is I'm seeing particular elements where China is moving into Africa, and China's kind of as I hear negative stories, but I also hear positive stories about negative stories about how China is really just moving in like criminals to Africa, and also how on a good side, they're also finding ways to build bridges and really develop infrastructure. When it comes down to speaking of infrastructure, and particularly, I think it's really it's something. We'll talk more about it in terms of this concept of infrastructure. But what's really interesting here is infrastructure in Africa and a lot of countries. They are made and developed to extract resources from Africa. And that's why all of the roads led to the port, or all of the major roads led to the ports. You know what I'm saying? Like that was it. It's almost like it's so sad, because it's just like this was such a powerful incentive that we can physically see that in the way that it was developed, in terms of seeing things today and understanding things today. In terms of this is in terms of capitalism versus colonial or versus socialism. I think this idea of colonialism leading to war in so many different cases and leading to violence in so many different cases between nations, I think we'll have to really, really think about and consider what's going to happen and take place. Like I said before, I think that, even with this tremendous strike against capitalism, I'm not going to necessarily say that capitalism it does not have valuable attributes to whatever system that we use moving forward. And I don't think that, I don't think we should view socialism as the answer. I do believe we should definitely carry this understanding, especially if you're if you view yourself more of a capitalist in nature. Now, in terms of suffering, and how we handle this concept in general, what I'm thinking is this idea of I went to Japan one time and I had and I asked, I think I was in some kind of city. I think I was like either Osaka or was it not, or I think it was Osaka. And I was asking, hey, look, I want, like, where can I find fish? And what's so funny to me is that the woman looked at me and she said, yeah, we don't, like, Osaka isn't next to any sea, basically. And it was just like, wait, what? Like, I didn't that concept of, not having fish because we're not next to a sea, where it was just such a moment, because it's just like, you start to think about, like, oh my goodness, like, I do kind of like, you start to realize, like, as an American, you're just like, what the heck am I, like, asking for? Like, but really it kind of, it puts you in a place of really separating yourself from the world in general, right? So this idea of our society in general being separated and being propped up and comfortable in so many ways that we don't even realize. I think we'll have to really have we'll come to an understanding that I'll say this idea of really development and moving into the future is going to be dependent on what we can do with the resources at hand, and not the resources that we can necessarily get or corporations may be incentivized to bring to us in any way, shape, or form. We do have to work on this, and we're kind of at a point to where we're going to be forced to work on this, because I think in November we're right at the beginning of December now, and they're talking about was it? I think there's an element of BRICS, right? So BRICS is like Brazil, Russia, China, basically just coming together with a kind of a new currency system that's going to threaten the superiority of the United States dollar. And I think we really have to understand something. The United States dollar, the power in that, is really through our military and our military presence elsewhere. So in terms of creating something now and new, we'll have to go really, really beyond. I don't believe that we survive as number one in our currency. I do believe but I don't believe that there is necessarily that means that we'll be destroyed, right? In terms of this society that we have now. In terms of if you look at like the Britain pound and things of that nature. The U.S. dollar, they overcame that in terms of being the superior currency, but they're still in existence, and I think we'll have to come to that conclusion because we work, the illusion of society today, I think, has been disrupted to an unrepairable extent of, if you're looking in, like I said, in December 2024, we're looking at kind of a few conflicts which have our nation and our politicians have been unsuccessful to really put us under the illusion that we are the good guys in everything that we do. And I think that illusion has been something that has kept us at the state of being number one in terms of our military presence and being able to being undisputed in the idea of creating our military presence. I think it's been very powerful, and I think we'll have to come to an understanding that that we've come to an understanding that what we've done is wrong. We've been exposed in a lot of different ways, and we have to kind of understand what we transition into now. And like I said, the conflicts abroad, they're not gaining support. They're not gaining the people's support in numbers that sustain efforts abroad in terms of our military presence or war in general. Now, this idea of what we do, if you have an idea of what we can do, please, in terms of or any type of reference material to really read in terms of how we transform our military presence into a presence that is more so hope-oriented rather than fear-oriented, right? So I think, our military bases, how do we transition into something healthier in terms of society in general? Definitely, it's definitely something to think about. Now, this idea of let's see. I'll say when it comes down to this African kingdoms, we mentioned how really they try to get Europeans to develop their own land and transition. They saw black people as an other, and that was kind of what we really didn't understand, or really what Africans failed to understand, is that there was an understanding in amongst white people, and also there was some Middle Eastern people. There was Middle Eastern people and white people, or there was kind of an understanding of us being on the bottom of this hierarchy, and this needing, or us being the enemy in some way, shape, or form. And that was something that a lot of us really didn't like, this element of, because it was an advantage in, kind of this novel idea of, this isn't going to be important in terms of the idea of skin color and skin tone. I think a lot of Africans thought this way, and they thought like, okay, well, this is someone I'm at war with, and this element of not seeing this person as another black person, but as a warring a warring nation that wants XYZ or has some kind of history with you. You don't see them as this idea of you don't see them as really another black person. You see them as something else. And I think this idea of not being able to or being really being able and naturally programmed to see past the idea of how someone looks in terms of their skin color, to really define a person based on based on their particular history. It serves now as kind of, okay, this is idealistic, but then in that time period, in that particular area, and it was a detriment. And the Africa was not one kingdom. It was various different types of tribes, various nations that came up, but the element of kind of viewing every single black person as the other enemy, that was powerful. That was very powerful. When you need to really divide and conquer a people, they don't necessarily, understand that you view all of them as one enemy and one problem. But this does become something that you may not necessarily think like that, and you think it can be kind of it can be faulty. It can be kind of a thinking that gets you in a really an inferior way of being. But in terms of the game, or in terms of the actual goals of that time, it was tremendously powerful. This is, imagine, this basically being able to chop up Africa in this particular way, in this particular mindset. People, tribes going against each other, having kind of a new way of, or more resources to particularly break down this particular system, or kind of you being able to play both sides and kind of pit them against each other in certain ways. It was powerful, and I think a lot of us don't realize just how powerful that is. And honestly, I think, I think there is an element of healing that has to take place for black people in America in particular, but Americans as a whole, right? So there's a thing called, multicultural therapy or something like that, particularly in America, right? Because we have this melting pot, or we advertise this melting pot, and we have to understand that what we have here is going to really be exactly what we advertise it as, and how to follow through on that. We'll have to really be more understanding of this idea of being a multicultural place. And in terms of the illusion of us always being the good guys, and across the world, I think is kind of we've crushed that. We've crushed that because it's more so, it's all built on a this hierarchy, this hierarchical myth that we've created, where white people stood on top and everybody else was everybody else wasn't on top. That right there is done in terms of this idea comes down crumbling. But what comes out and what can come about, I think we can do something about that in terms of the repair and whatever society comes about next. Now, this ideology fueled a lot of fuels colonialism everywhere, right? So we're better than you. We're going to take what you have, and you're going to do what we say because in a lot of cases, our military presence is better than yours. Now that we have that, it's in terms of what we do now, it doesn't. That does not. We can't force. We are no longer able to put people under the illusion that they are the good guys to force themselves into any incident anymore. And this idea of particularly like colonialism in Africa, there were kingdoms in Africa that were against slavery, right? So they were against slavery, and they tried to, they saw where things were going, to the point to where they sent people to Europe to try to get them to develop their own land. But this element, these kingdoms were eventually overcome, and due to the infighting between really the nations and kingdoms in Africa, because they didn't see this this racial hierarchy as important as the people, as the European people. And it came down to a lot of people, a lot of nations crumbled under this idea. But if you know of a lot of if you know anything about like Africa and the age of colonialism, one guy that usually stands out is this guy Shaka Zulu, and this guy was Rodney had kind of a tidbit on this guy too, because apparently this guy was he was a general or ruler, and it wasn't necessarily like he kind of made a name for himself well before kind of facing the European settler, the European colonialist. And this is like kind of an idea of he was able to really he was somebody who was just military strategist, to where neighboring tribes, they feared him. They feared the Zulu nation because of him. And he was able to essentially, he was a military genius well before interacting with European colonialists. And he structured this kingdom, this nation, and to essentially be that, to be more militarily prepared. And I mean, the idea of kind of how he was brought up, how he came about, I think is something that is underestimated in our understanding, that, oh, he's the guy that basically told the white people to go fuck themselves. Like, he is, like, you know, like, he is more than that. It's just like, he was just the guy. Like, if anyone stood in front of him, he'd say, yeah, go fuck you. Like, if any, like, he was really that dude in terms of just the able to, like, just structure and you know, and develop cities to that degree. And it was something to see that, because it was just like, you know, we kind of all had this, or we all have an idea, but we really don't understand that, you know, this guy was a legend, well, you know, before the interacting with colonialists, and we really don't understand that. Also, in the intro, we talked a little bit about, or we talked about education, and eventually, like, colonialism evolved, right? So the idea was, you know, capturing people. Kind of, it came to a point to where it was really frowned upon to capture and enslave, you know, people from, you know, from nations in Africa. And eventually, like, it seemed to be like, it was just more profitable to really create educational structures that essentially placed colonial, or just incentivized and really, like, solidified the idea of being a colony state, right? And it was just something to where, you know, like, hey, if we can essentially put this, you know, educate people to believe this system, then we'll be able to hold it without necessarily expending so many resources. And it was interesting because the system in Africa, or the system of education, is just like, hey, the people who are most educated, quote unquote, they will go to whatever, they will go to their, you know, the home country for the colonists, and they'll be finished being educated there. And that was effective in many ways, but there were a lot of people that just realized that, you know, the idea of education in these particular institutions was really relying on the idea of you no longer believing that you are African, you seeing these people as other people, right? And it's interesting. It's very interesting just to say it, because it's just like, it almost, like, it sounds, you know, it sounds like not necessarily you're no longer African, but you're not educated about your surroundings. You're not educated about what's around you, right? So the herbs, you know, the farmland and things like that, in terms of your home countries, you know, what comes in your, or what can be made from your home country other than cash crops, right? Cash crops were the main thing. And eventually that was kind of became an initiative to teach people about cash crops. And but what's so funny is, like, a lot of what they found was, like, it created some real advocates in terms of black people who were, you know, advocates for the idea of, you know, the home country for the colonists, right? So, like, black people who really thought that they were French, or, you know, really thought they were Britain, and that was effective in that. But they found in a lot of cases that the idea of education by its nature was kind of anti-colonialist, because then the idea of equality, you have to more so, when you have to explain why the people who are colonized don't have that, it can be a tremendous issue, because it can be a tremendous issue, and these guys, you get the advocates, but you also get the leaders, right? The leaders who understand and know, like, hey, this isn't right, what's going on right now. And they kind of had to play that game for a while in terms of trying to figure out what's going to happen. And if you look at Africa today, like, we'll talk more about, like, kind of private militaries and things like that, but it's kind of the CIA's been known to do coups and everything like that, but I think there's kind of a shroud in terms of what's taken place, I think, in Africa in a lot of situations, and I think the private military complex right now is creating tremendous upsets in Africa that we really don't understand, and we really, and it's like the idea of what's happening currently in Africa is something that I think is going to be something that shocks even people now with our understanding of what they're able to do. In terms of the CIA in general, or people and corporations, it's very profitable if you can, have someone dig a mine, and you don't have to necessarily follow the safety standards of people digging people that are American who dig mines. It becomes very profitable, and it's something that we have to think about in terms of what's taking place now, because it appears that when you have intellectual leaders, there's kind of a system in place to squash that out quite literally now. I think we'll have to think about that in terms of what's taking place. And also this idea of religion was coupled with a lot of colonial education, and unfortunately, I think it helped develop a lot of reasoning behind the inequality that existed between nations. The idea of kind of this white Jesus figure being on the wall, and everything else kind of being regarded as Wiccan or witchcraft, and any type of tribal worship systems being that, being the other, it's very powerful to create that, and unfortunately it looks like a lot of people did create that and relied on that in terms of that system. And like I said, it was profitable in a lot of different ways. In terms of like noteworthy attributes, I really do want to put out that this idea of this incentive to develop nation or develop places outside of our own country. This idea of development being kind of coupled with how to more efficiently extract the resources from this area it's a tremendous problem right now. It's a tremendous problem that what we have currently in place in the system that we have in place, and a lot of us don't understand what we're propped up by. But I mean, if you tell a corporation, or if you tell if you leave it to corporations, they will create all roads that lead to the sea, to get to to their boats to America. And we really don't understand that. In terms of this, there is a lot of talk about, let's make things fair, but people don't understand what exactly that would mean for the society that they live in today. And we really do have to come to that conclusion that, or I think it's really impossible to not come to the conclusion that we're going to really be overtaken as the number one currency. At least maybe it could be temporary. It could be something that only lasts for, however long. But I do believe it will happen in terms of this restructuring of society to, essentially follow through on this promise or this advertisement that we really give out. Now, in terms of this particular talk, we're talking about colonialism and the Renaissance, how we can shape how the effects of colonialism, but also kind of really what we have to think about in terms of creating a new system, right? Very important. And something that I really encourage all of us to think deeply about. And also, if you have any ideas about, or any books or ideas, books in particular, but ideas in general too, if you have anything that talks about us converting kind of military bases into something, something else, something more. Something more favorable, please let me know. In any case, do all the YouTube stuff, do all the podcast stuff, and I'll be hopefully I'll be seeing you soon. Thank you.